Hi, this is Megha Joshi, the host of the Boardroom Zen podcast. This show is created for the ambitious business leaders. Are you someone wanting to play big? Want to possess a strong brand and executive presence that makes you belong in every room you walk into? And all of this without putting your personal life on hold? If the answer to those questions is yes, then you are in the right place. In this show, I sit down with best-in-class leaders to distill their wisdom while sharing what helped me stand out as a Fortune 100 executive. So let's get started. Our guest today is someone I would describe as a media legend. He's a proven leader in building and growing best-in-class media businesses, including several of the industry's most successful startups. His superpowers are driving results through innovative business development, content distribution, and branded partnership strategies. He's been an executive at Scripps, Bloomberg, Comedy Central, TV One, and many more. He now serves as the CEO of his own consulting firm called Eagle Dock Media. Please join me in welcoming none other than Brad Samuels to the show. Brad, welcome.
Hey, good to see you, Megha, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Likewise, and it took a few months in the making. I know we got introduced earlier this year through a common friend, Steve Goldman's, and then we obviously met in person, and now here we are doing this interview, and I'm so stoked to be unpacking your journey and see what we can learn from that.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here as well. I hope at the end you still think of me as a legend. That's a big word. I don't remember being referred to that way, but maybe this is the beginning of a new exciting time in my life where I'm in my legendary phase. So let's go for it.
You're too humble. And so, Brad, I know you're a New Yorker who grew up in the Midwest. And I'm just wondering, are there any key early life experiences that had the most profound impact on both your life and your career trajectory as such?
Sure. Yeah. I was thinking about this a little bit, and the two themes that I think really resonate or kind of were key influences were the fact, both related to my dad's career, in that the kind of work he did and me observing him and him being somebody that I was very impressed by and fond of and wanted to kind of emulate in a lot of ways was important to me and really made a big impact. And also, he was in the radio business, and like many folks back then and in the media business now, I suppose to a certain degree, we moved a lot from different towns as he moved up the ladder kind of into management and so forth. And so fortunately for me, as opposed to my older brother and sister who are a little bit older, I was in third grade when we made our final move. So I was able to kind of settle in and stay in one place from then on. But before that, we moved 5 or 6 times when I was a young child. And I think that experience, which wasn't fun at the time and was a little traumatic, and maybe that's a strong word, also did help me learn to adapt and to adjust and to evolve a little bit and learn how to deal with new circumstances. And so I think that has kind of formed, kind of was a big part of influencing my personality and my outlook on the rest of my life and how I kind of manage my career with a comfort level with that, with being almost eager to jump into new situations and have a comfort level that I'd be able to figure it out. It didn't always feel like it at the beginning. And that's always a challenge to kind of react and move forward when you're thrown into a new circumstance. But I think it was great learning for me and really helped me to be able to do more of that. I went to a college where I didn't know anybody. It was kind of a random choice. And I went through another period of kind of figuring things out. And that was another one of those stages that I think helped me learn how to adapt. And the other thing was my dad's career in the media business and radio at the time. Watching him be part of something that was so prevalent in society. He was the general manager of a radio station in the Washington, D.C. area in the late 60s when there was so much going on with politics and, unfortunately things like, I remember when MLK was assassinated and he ran to the radio station to help deal with the coverage in the news and do editorials. And it just really seemed so compelling and interesting that he was involved in a career that everybody could kind of relate to, how it hit in society and made a difference in the way people dealt with life and the news and so forth. And so I think I kind of got hooked early on media, how it interacted with society. And I guess I was kind of destined to end up in it, sooner than later. So those are a
Yeah,
couple things that come to mind.
yeah, super helpful. And clearly, it appears that early on in your life, you were thrown into the deep end of the pool to figure it out yourself as you were moving around or, attending new schools and what have you. And obviously, watching your dad through his career trajectory seems like he had a big impression on you growing
He
up.
did. I mean, I was very lucky to have two parents that were very supportive and were great role models. And, as we were moving and he was taking on new responsibilities, I was young. I didn't really understand what was involved for him career wise, but I could see he was working very hard at it. He had a lot of passion for it. And he figured out how to take on more responsibility, and he really succeeded and eventually went out on his own and created his own little station group and kind of became an entrepreneur himself. And it took me a long time to get there, and I've done some very small version of that here in the last few years with my little company. But all those things really had an impact on me. I think watching him, kind of the commitment that he had for his business and his, I think, passion for it without being too intense or too, a heavy-handed about it, was a really nice balance that he struck that I think hopefully kind of settled with me and allowed me to take on some of those same, I guess, positive traits. And, look, he met a lot of famous people. He was in the forefront of kind of the public, kind of eye and so forth. And so I think, that gave me a comfort level to be a little bit more gregarious and kind of comfortable with the spotlight in a certain small way that I have in my career. So, both my parents are very social, kind of, engaging people. And so, the family unit for me was really the driving influence in my youth. And in my case, I was lucky to have great parents, great siblings, and got a good launching pad to kind of jump in and got into media pretty quickly after school.
Yeah, and how cool is that? In fact, I've read somewhere that the big majority of a person's brain development happens in the first 7 years in terms of who they engage with, what they're told, what belief systems are formed during those first 7 years. And clearly, your early years gave you so many rich experiences to build a strong foundation, especially having two strong parents that you can look up to. I think it's absolutely wonderful, and it speaks a bit to the amount of success you've accrued over the course of your own career. And clearly, a common thread I see there is your risk appetite. Looking at your trajectory, you've moved around and you've been in some of the top positions in many of the organizations, including Comedy Central, TV One, and so on. And so you've moved around and navigated across organizations, across functions in the media space. So tell me more on how you navigated that change and what were, if at all, any strategies you deployed for you to stay successful.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's probably the common theme in my career. It's not uncommon, but then I've seen a lot of people, even in the media business, work at HBO for 20, 25 years, and that's great too. I admire that on a lot of levels, but I think so much of the way you manage your career obviously is coming from, your basic personality and your sense of perspective and so forth. And I like to be part of building things and new challenges and helping to kind of create and bring new kind of businesses to the market. And on the other side of that, I tend to get a little bored when we're in more of a status quo kind of maintenance mode for whatever reason. Maybe that does go back to kind of jumping into new situations and finding it interesting. I have a lot of curiosity about life and business and so forth. And so while I've always stayed in the same industry generally and the same kind of a role, I've taken on a lot of different kinds of things, big companies, small companies. But in many cases, it was a startup or an early stage company that really needed their executives to be very diverse in their skill set, in their network, in their resources, management ability, and so forth, to help to kind of pull a bunch of different disciplines together, figure out a strategy, build the product, go to market, position it, get it out there and get it built up. And for me, that's been the most gratifying thing, that I've been able to be involved in several of those kind of successful startups. I feel like I've looked for those actively. They've come in a lot of different forms, sometimes required me to move to a new place or commute across the country to get into that situation. And it's challenging. A lot of these startups had good pedigree. They were supported by good partners, but they weren't automatic successes by any stretch. And, it has its own kind of stress and kind of challenge to it. But the reward, I think, for me was always much greater when I could look back a couple of years later or many more years later and say, we really started from kind of nothing and we're able to make a real impact on the industry. As you get later in your career, that's a great feeling to know that you've had some of those experiences. So, I guess that's kind of what was in my mind as I went through these changes. And, it's resulted in a lot of really interesting, different kinds of brands, from comedy to African-American focused content to business with Bloomberg. Although I've kind of noticed a thing where it seems like as I've aged, the demographic target of the businesses, that I worked for. So it was Comedy Central and MTV, and then it was, Ovation, an artsy thing, and then Bloomberg, a business thing. And then, so I guess there was a certain symmetry to kind of, as I matured, the products I was selling were kind of a good fit for where I was in life. And maybe that was something that made it work a little bit better. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, Brad. And clearly you mentioned being ready for change, right? And you mentioned you've moved around during the course of your career geographically. You've probably been on the road quite a lot. It's not for everybody, right? Because when you're on the road, when you embrace such a go-go lifestyle, it takes a toll on many things, whether it's the personal life, whether it's family, whether it's their own health and well-being. So I am curious to hear how you manage to stay healthy and motivated amidst all this craziness.
Oh, I'm glad you finished that question that way. I thought you were going to say, and that's why you look like you do with the bald head. And no,
No.
thank you. I guess I really enjoy meeting new people. And so travel for me is very natural. And my kids will always give me a hard time about being the dad that talks to the person behind the rental car counter, just like, let's just keep going, Dad. You don't have to talk to everybody. But so whether it was that at a restaurant or it was at a client office or whatever, for me, it's just really developing new relationships and enjoying this kind of thing we're doing right now is really at the core of what I really enjoy doing. And so travel came naturally. It's been great to be able to go around the country and see so many cities and, really enjoy the areas and the restaurants and so many things to do, although you didn't usually have time to really explore. For me, it just felt like it was a good fit with my personality, but it was hard, particularly for my family, I think. My wife worked until we had our fourth kid, which has been a long time now. And so then she was in the media business. So then she kind of took over really taking care of the family, which was amazing and allowed me to go do the kinds of things you were talking about, to travel for business and go to conferences and do meetings and be away quite a bit. That was essential to my comfort level to go do it and know that everything was in probably better shape than if I was at home sometimes. So that was a big part of it. I guess when I was young, I wasn't a great athlete, but I did play sports and I got an appreciation for what it felt like to kind of be in shape. And, there's a mental aspect to that too. I'm no marathon or, kind of triathlete by any stretch, but I do something almost every day and it just makes me feel better. It gives me energy. It makes me feel like I'm balancing out those nights of having an extra drink or a little bit too little sleep. And so I just got that a little bit into my blood early on and I've been able to stick with it. And I think, doing something to keep yourself healthy, diet, but mostly a little exercise and, making sure that you restore when you go home and get some sleep and, kind of relax really made a difference, I think, in my ability to kind of keep doing it for so many years and enjoying it. And I still feel like if I don't travel every couple of weeks, I get a little, antsy. So it's just kind of part of my being. And, luckily I've been able to stay on top of it pretty well.
That's amazing. And I hear what you mean by, well, you didn't call it that, but I'll call it, it's called travitude. The feeling that people get when they stop traveling for a bit. I see that because I experience the same travitude when I'm not traveling. I have the same travel bug in me.
Yeah, that's why the pandemic was so hard, right? Because we're so used to getting out, whether it was locally or traveling for fun or for work. And, even to this day, I find it really odd to have a business phone call. I just want to see the person. And
Right.
there's a whole nother element to not just the enjoyment of seeing their face, but also their reactions. And when you're trying to sell something, those nonverbal cues can be essential to knowing whether you're hitting the mark and knowing kind of how to handle the rest of the conversation. So, those couple of
Totally.
years were difficult. Luckily, I have a great neighborhood to walk around and a bunch of friends I could at least, kind of keep in touch with. But yeah, for those of us that like to get out, I know you travel a lot. That was a really tough period. It felt very unnatural for everybody, but particularly for those of us that like to get out there and move around.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And you obviously hit on several key pillars of health and well-being, whether it's nutrition, sleep, exercise, and also having a steady foundation or a cornerstone, which was your wife in your case, that kept things grounded and steady for you. But above all, I think there's this dimension of being disciplined. I'm sure it played a big role, although you didn't name it, but clearly that is what kept all those moving pieces together and harmonized, if you will.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a lot of this stuff, if you're lucky, comes kind of naturally, and it's not, something I was super conscious of. But there was a lot of early mornings, waking up, going to the airport, jumping on the train, commuting from here in Long Island into the city at all hours, and late night trips home and jumping back on the train in the morning, that, you really had to stay on top of it. You had to be, committed to it. And I think that probably just goes back again to how I was raised. I had great role models who, didn't really have to say any of those things. They just acted them out and lived that way. And it was in a positive, purposeful way, not one that was kind of, pushed on me or in some kind of, kind of templated way. And so that organic kind of energy and productivity, was something that was just kind of infused in me, I think, from early days. And there was times where it was tough. I've had a couple of breaks that helped me to kind of get recharged and come back into my next gig and so forth. But look, people say they never worked a day in their life. I never felt that way. Work is work. I've enjoyed it. And there's been times where it was better and worse. And when I knew I needed to make a change because I wasn't happy, it's a bit of a roller coaster at times, like anybody's career
Sure.
will be. But you knew that showing up, I think my dad had a couple of great sayings. I keep bringing him up, but a lot of it is just being there and showing the effort. And, once I get in the room, I can do okay, but you got to show up and you got to be there and you got to put the time in. And, again, I was lucky to be healthy, to have a healthy family, to have limited difficulties outside of work, which really allowed me to focus on that. I have so much respect for people who have to go through more outside challenges and balance that with work, which is already very difficult. So I've been very blessed
Sure.
with a fairly easy path when it comes to, the health and so forth of my family. And, it's made it easier to keep my head down and just kind of, stay at it.
Thank you for sharing, Brad. That is super helpful. And now, as we are getting towards the end of the interview, I have one last question for you. You ready?
Yes, of course.
So, what would be that one piece of advice you wish you had during the early stages of your career, if there's one?
Well, if you know me at all, and we just got to know each other recently, there's never just one. There has to be 3 or 4. I'll try to keep it quick, but I
Bring it
think
on.
it's interesting when you look back a little bit after you've been around a little while. I think, figuring out what you enjoy, which is tough. You're in college, let's say, as you're starting your career. I didn't know that I was going to be good or would enjoy sales. I was lucky enough to be thrown out in the streets by my dad, who had a little radio station, and he gave me a chance to find out if I was any good and if I enjoyed selling radio advertising to local businesses. And it wasn't glamorous. I'd walk in and knock on the door of a car dealership and say, hey, how about buying some radio? And, I found out pretty quickly that I actually enjoyed it. I could have gone the other way. And so a lot of it is experimenting and kind of, talking to folks, getting a feel for whether your personality fits a role that's more technical or more interpersonal or wherever it might be. And then I think the other thing people, and maybe this seems really obvious, but where my career has worked and not worked, and I think this is true of a lot of people, it's been very dependent on the culture and the size and the type of company. I've been fairly flexible and okay at working at bigger and smaller companies, but I've come to learn I'm a better fit in certain environments and certain cultures. And I'm sure that's true of most people, if not everybody. And it took me a little while to come to understand that a big corporate, political, kind of administrative oriented organization is just not for me. I'm more of a freewheeling person. I don't love to be kind of kept in a certain very tight kind of like narrow lane. And I find that very difficult to manage through. And so, there's a lot of benefits to working at big companies. And for some people, that is a perfect fit. So there's no right or wrong, but a lot of it just has to do with, trying to sense whether, you're somebody who likes to have more freedom and try to be more challenged to do more things at once and collaborate more, or you want to kind of be plugged into something that's a little bit more kind of clear and a little more narrow and just kind of do your thing that way. So, those are a couple of the things that I think have started to kind of like make more sense to me and kind of be a theme throughout my career. And I took one job that was at a big company that I kind of knew I was ready for a change. I needed to move back to full-time in New York versus commuting to another market where I had to do my other job. It had been a few years. And I took this job at a big company, and I kind of knew it wasn't going to work. I remember walking around my kitchen for what felt like hours, just pacing around going, is this really the right thing? And I did it, and it wasn't the right thing. I found that out pretty quickly, and I lasted a couple of years. And, people have tendencies and certain things that are built in and wired in, and, trying to adjust to some things that are that fundamental to you usually isn't going to work. So,
Sure.
find the kind of work you like, the kind of size and nature and feel of the company. Comedy Central was a partnership of two big companies, but it was run independently. It was fairly small, very creative, and, irreverent. And so that fit to me, which is very much the kind of a lot of the things that were in my family growing up and my friends and so forth, was just the right thing. So those are great moments and years when you can spend time kind of locked into a place that kind of matches what you're about and what you're comfortable with. So, easier said than done, but there's just some of the things looking back that feel important to me and work for me.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And some excellent call outs there. The one that stuck out to me, Brad, was the mention of fit with a company culture in the ecosystem. And I think it requires a high degree of self-awareness to really know what works for you, what kind of an environment, culture, in people, in organizational, guardrails work for an individual. And typically, a lot of us who are chasing the next golden ball, if you will, we run after position, power, brand names, and whatnot without really recognizing the environment where we could be incredibly successful, even if it's a smaller place or a bigger place, whatever it is. And I think that requires a lot of self-awareness for sure, which clearly, you built over the course of those years.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would say, and you hear this all the time, is, hire people that are smarter than you. It sounds easy, but it's not easy. Everybody has a little insecurities and defensiveness at times, and it always feels better to sit in a room and act like you have all the best ideas, but you're not going to get the best ideas that way. And I came through a long growing process of knowing that, what's most important is to get great ideas on the table and figure out which ones are the best and how to move forward with them. You're only going to do that if you hire people that are really smart, that are feeling comfortable being open with their ideas, and that they'll be rewarded and appreciated. That's one of those things I learned as I went through my career. Probably never have gotten quite great at it, but it takes a certain level of confidence and understanding that you don't have to have your fingerprints on everything. As long as you're a part of the process, you might have led the process, you're succeeding as a team, and the tide is rising as a result. That's really the best situation, the best dynamic to shoot for, and something I'm still learning, but I think took me a while, but I could eventually see how it really yielded some amazing growth and success for some of the organizations I was involved in.
Right. Yeah. And beautifully summarized, Brad, in terms of some of the areas that we as leaders, as we are going through our trajectory, things that we got to bear in mind. And clearly, a lot of us, actually, every one of us has some degree of insecurity. We may not verbalize it, we may not even recognize it, but we have it by virtue of being a human being. And so that's where self-awareness comes into play, so we can work with those insecurities and work around them and still be incredibly successful without letting our ego take the front seat, if you will.
Yeah, I guess the only last other thing I would say now that I'm on my sixth answer to your question, and it's the same with my friends and so forth. I love being around people that are just really smart. My wife's super intelligent and really clever. And so it's just more fun. It's more interesting, and you learn. Like anything, the people around you will kind of have a sway on you as well, whether it's ethics or energy or whatever it is. The more you're surrounding yourself with people that you want to emulate, or you're going to inevitably, whether you're conscious of it or not, makes a difference. And so, I always try to get around the smartest people, work with them, learn from them, both just intellectually and from how they kind of go about their life. And, it's just, I think, helped me to grow and just have a much more interesting career because, you know, you're on the front end of the industry and the business when you're around people who are really leaders. And the media business has become particularly so crazy lately that we're all trying to figure it out at the same time. And if you have a network of people that you consider very strategic and smart, you know, it just kind of snowballs. And so I've been lucky or smart enough, I guess, to get around smart people. So.
Yeah, and excellent call outs there, Brad. I could keep going on this topic of networking and building a robust professional network, but maybe we'll keep it for another day. And I just want to say how wonderful it's been having this conversation with you finally and unpacking all those years of wisdom. So thank you so much for making time for me, Brad. It's been an absolute privilege.
It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me, and good luck going forward with everything you're doing. I know you'll continue to have great success, and I'll look forward to hearing more of your podcast with other folks.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
There is no better time than now to stop playing small and tap into your zone of genius. With a Boardroom Zen executive coach by your side, experience the game-changing transformation, both internally and externally. Find out more on boardroomzen.com. And thank you for listening to my show. It means so much to me. I'd love for you to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite listening platform. More power to you, and hope to see you soon.